So, whilst you all and I process what both of our speakers have said, we're going to take on Julie's rebuttal to that. She's going to have 10 minutes. Julie, you ready?
Where do I start?
Okay, and begin.
I did agree with some of what you said, Zara, but to start, obviously, with what I don't agree with. It's interesting that you bring up individual case studies in Saudi Arabia and said, well, why don't we hear of these individual case studies? Why do we only ever hear anecdotes from the other side? Well, thankfully, we don't need to hear anecdotes because there is documented evidence by Amnesty International, by pretty much every single human rights organisation in the world where feminists have suggested to them that women are also human and that we have rights, where they have documented the oppression and abuse, murder and force of women under religion, under Islam, under all of the major religions. So Saudi Arabia is one country that we have reams of evidence on. You say that you don't see it as a typically a Muslim country. I was in Dubai recently, the most liberal of all the UAE states, and I visited a refuge for women who were trafficked and abused within marriage, and it's grim the way that the women are blamed and that the men are excused and empowered within their choices to beat and abuse women. So I think we've got a long way to go. But I think in your discussion about individualist feminism, Zara, it's where you and I would agree. I hope you haven't mistaken me for one of those.
No.
Right, because I'm not interested in women at the top, in the chief execs, who incidentally are probably depressed, more depressed than women in lower paid jobs because of the constant harassment, sexual and otherwise, the bullying that they get from men who are working underneath them. But I'm interested in women at the bottom. And any society will show you how just and fair it is for women by showing us the women who are the most disenfranchised, the poorest, the women in prostitution, for example, the women who are trafficked, homeless women, single mothers, women who live outside of the margins. They're the women I'm interested in. And the individualistic feminism can be on the political right. In fact, it usually is on the political right. It's women saying, I've pulled myself up by my bootstraps, so therefore you can too. And they call themselves feminists, and I would absolutely dispute that they are feminists because they're not interested in a political social movement for the liberation of all. They're interested in their own position. That's all. And feminism will liberate everyone. It will absolutely liberate men from this straitjacket of traditional masculinity, of the expectation that they will be the ones to sink on the ship while women and children are saved first because we're weaker souls. They'll be able to stop even holding open doors for us and jumping up to give us a seat on the tube. Little things, but all important. Because obviously, men are not happy under patriarchy. Men have power, and men hang on to that power. But believe me when I tell you, it will liberate everyone. So I'm not a career feminist. I've never read de Beauvoir. I'm afraid I probably couldn't possibly get through it, even if I tried. But I think that the notion of women being offered, or it made more palatable for women to be in traditional heterosexual family units raising children and being homemakers, that will just encourage more. Well, I heard some gasps about that because obviously it sounds as though what she was saying, and what other feminists might also be saying, is that that isn't a choice that women should make. Not at all. What feminists are saying is that women shouldn't be railroaded, bullied, blackmailed, or forced into marriage, childbirth, etc. Not all women want children. Some couples actually choose a different way of raising children. I mean, a revolutionary idea is that men also do the childcare. So biology is not destiny. Yes, there are biological differences. Yes, they matter. But we are not mammals in, well, we are, obviously, but we're not, well, question everything. We're not animals who can't change, who aren't involved in the evolution of our species. We are. So we should absolutely get rid of biology as destiny and move forward in a way that shows that equality belongs to everyone. Now, when I speak about equality, and Zara said, you know, this isn't something that's doable, it's the equal but different argument. Well, yes, of course we can't be absolutely the same as men in ways of, I don't know, some hormonal, some biological differences. Who cares? That shouldn't matter. I'm talking about having the same human rights. I'm not actually talking about wanting the same amount of testosterone as a man. It's having the same human rights. Now, I'm from a working class northeastern background. My father worked in a steel mill. I don't want to work in a steel mill. I actually want to overthrow patriarchy, not join it. I want that behaviour to be challenged and questioned. So I want to get rid of patriarchy. I'm a gender abolitionist. I don't think that we should be viewed by our gender. I think we should be viewed by the fact that we're human beings. And stop the equal but different nonsense. Stop that. Because we need to recognise all over the world, women are miserable. Women are miserable. Women are trapped. There are individual women who are doing great. And that's fine for them. But until we liberate all women, and I'm talking about those at the bottom or those living under the worst legal and social tyranny, then, of course, feminism hasn't done its job. And that's where Zara and I part company.
Right, shall I pass over to Zara? Do you want to start your rebuttal?
So again, I mean, we didn't really hear any solutions. We just heard a lot of, I want to liberate, I want to overthrow, I want to do this, and we want to do that. But again, you know, there's still no system, no solution posited, no actual answers to how we're supposed to do this. And the difference is that Islam does have a solution. And in terms of the biology point which Julie raised, the fact is Islam doesn't force women to marry. It doesn't force anybody to marry. What Islam does is it tries to accommodate for the proclivities in society. The vast number of women and men in society will want to marry. The vast number of men and women in society will want to have children. So Islam accommodates for this general proclivity that takes place and which is influenced by biology. It's women that have the children, not the men. And so Islam doesn't straitjacket or say you have to be a woman in order to be respected. You have to have, you have to be married or you have to have children. Aisha, radiallahu anha, who was one of the wives of the Prophet, she didn't have any children. She's one of the most revered individuals in our Islamic history. And we have lots of examples of people, women who are valued for things that are other than just their role as in the family. However, Islam doesn't say that if you're just a wife or if you're just a homemaker, you are somehow inferior to anybody else. Rather, it supports those women who want to take on that role, and it values them. And it supports them by making the system accommodate for them by having rights and responsibilities between men and women so that women aren't left to kind of fend for themselves. Women can't engage in just casual relationships and then have the guy walk away with no responsibilities towards him at all, like we have in this very kind of, sexually liberated feminist world that we have here today. Islam says no, women cannot be exploited by people, neither can men. This is why Islam takes action by actually prohibiting things. It prohibits relations outside of marriage. It takes actions to deal with these things. But what does feminism actually offer other than, these kind of general platitudes that everybody would agree with? Nobody likes oppression. Nobody likes anybody being hurt. But what are the solutions? And this is what we're discussing here today. We're not discussing who recognizes oppression. We're discussing which one has actually a model to liberate women. Now, Julie invoked human rights. She said, we should have all this human rights. But again, human rights is not a basis for establishing who should have what right. If you were on a desert island, would the island respect your human right to life or your human right to shelter or anything like your right to speak? If we have human rights for all people, if it's just about being human, then why are those human rights revoked, for example, if you commit a crime? Suddenly your right to free movement is taken away. Therefore, these rights don't connect with simply being human. The reality is that rights actually come out of what people deserve. It comes out of what people need and what they deserve. There's no intrinsic right for anybody. And in order to understand what people deserve and what people need, you need a model, and you need a purpose, and you need actually some solutions to these issues. Islam, I mentioned earlier, posits something in regards to, the economic problem. It posits a system, an economic system. But I want to bring, some more solutions, some more ideas about things that Islam poses that actually liberates people. So, for example, in terms of the economy, we find, in this capitalist system, it's basically the concept of infinite wants and limited resources. And this is why you end up with these huge gaps between the rich and the poor, why you have, maybe some people say that the vast majority of people experiencing poverty are women. Islam doesn't take that approach. Islam has a system of incentive and distribution. Just an example, the Quran stipulates a tax on the rich, which is called the zakat. And that must go towards 8 categories of people: those living in absolute poverty, those who cannot meet their basic needs, the zakat collectors themselves, like the people who actually collect, this money, people who are not Muslim to aid their relationship with the Muslim, and it goes to people to free them from either slavery or bondage. It goes to people who have incurred overwhelming debts while attempting to satisfy just their basic needs. It goes to those working in a good cause, and it goes to those who are simply traveling. And this is a simple system that makes sure that people are not left to fend for themselves in the way that we see in the West. What does feminism offer economically? What does feminism offer politically? What does feminism offer by way of systems and solutions? This is what I'd like to hear from Julie, rather than just, we need to overthrow patriarchy, we need to do this, because not many people disagree with these things.
Oh, I've got a closing statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have
I'll
five,
just say what I
five
forgot
minutes.
to say earlier then.
You have 5 minutes for this.
Okay, I want to pick something up that Zara said about clothing. This notion that somehow feminism has failed, or rather secular Western society has failed women because of the pornification, the sexualization of women. And I think that we have that everywhere we look, whether women are required to cover up, whether it's the Orthodox Jewish woman wearing a sheitel because her hair will distract her husband from his study and his prayer, whether it's the nun wearing a habit because, of course, she's married to Jesus and she remains celibate, or whether it's the veil or any other covering that gives a very clear message to men and to women and girls and boys growing up that women's flesh is somehow tempting, that women are to blame if they are sexually assaulted and raped, that men, in fact, remember, this wasn't me or Andrea Dworkin said, all men are potential rapists. It's the religious elders who say, if a woman shows her flesh, a man will not be able to resist temptation, meaning he will have to rape her. Now, this is an appalling. Now, we can all interpret and misinterpret Holy Scriptures. This is a very clear message that we get from why women are required to be covered. Now, when women are in court, if they're brave enough to complain of rape, if they've been wearing very little clothing, if they've been out and they're wearing short skirts, low-cut tops, the reason why they were raped, of course, in popular mythology is because of how they were dressed. If a woman has been drinking, alcohol becomes the new short skirt. This is everywhere. We have sexual violence and endemic sexual violence in every single country in the world under the strictest religious doctrine. We have it in Saudi Arabia, we have it in Pakistan, we have it in the UK, we have it everywhere. And we know this because of the documentation of the human rights organisations, whether it's the World Health Organization, Amnesty International, whatever. So let's not pretend here that women who are required to cover their flesh are safe from sexual violence, from sexual harassment, or from being pointed at as whether she's a good or a bad, an honourable or a dishonourable woman. What I would like, actually, is for those questions and labels to stop. Just as men have freedom in public as well as private to wear what they wish, And I regularly see religious men wearing shorts and T-shirts in the summer, whilst women are fully veiled walking behind them. And I've seen this in Israel with Jewish women. I've seen it everywhere I go. So let's just have the same standard for men and women. And when Zara speaks about human rights, yes, of course human rights can be revoked. Yes, of course, if you're on a desert island, nobody's there to give them to you. What I'm saying is, I'd quite like women to be seen as human and to have the same human rights as men. That's how we measure whether or not feminism is effective. Zara suggests that I have no strategy, that my movement has no answers, no strategy. Well, we've done pretty well. 4 or 5 decades of feminism. Not that many of us that are actually that active, because not that many women have the time or the energy, or lacking in restriction to do that. And we've put violence against women globally on the map. We've changed laws, policies, attitudes. So we still have much work to do, but we have a very, very clear strategy. And it's that we stop, we refuse to be treated as second-class citizens, and we say this is a collective movement for all women and not just those at the top.
Last 5 minutes for Zara.
Okay, so just to also respond as well as closing comments, Julie mentioned veiling and, you know, how women are told to be veiled and men walk around in their shorts and things. Actually, in Islam, both men and women have instructions for how much they have to cover their body. For women, it's, you know, everything but the face and hands. Men have to cover from the navel to the knee, which is why you might see them wearing shorts. But it has these different yardsticks for men and women, but it has criteria for both. And the reason for that is because, you know, sexual dimorphism, men and women have different levels of, you know, attraction like you see in animals. And so women are just generally asked to cover up, you know, more than men are. And it's considered a responsibility between men and women. And the reason is not to prevent you from rape. It's actually, you know, to ensure that you minimize the level of sexual tension in society. And it's to ensure that women can go out to work, they can go out and be involved in politics, and they can go out and be involved in education without all of these problems that we see in the West where people are told to wear whatever they want. Now, in the Muslim world, again, you know, we saw the example Julie Bindel raised again. It's not an Islamic system. It's a they're secular systems, they're, you know, constitutional monarchies, they're not Islamic systems, and they don't actually apply the Islamic system holistically, which is why we see some of the problems there today. We also heard about, endemic sexual violence, as if Islam promotes or mandates this or allows this. Islam has such harsh punishments for rape and sexual violence. For example, even one woman, went to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and said, I've been raped. And immediately, they didn't need, you know, sometimes people say, oh, you need 4 witnesses. No, it was none of that. Her witness testimony alone was enough. The perpetrator was brought to justice immediately. Islam does not take kindly to these kinds of offenses and these kinds of transgressions, which is why it has very strict punishments. But if we want to talk about rape, for example, what about in, you know, the Western system at the moment? It's funny because, rape doesn't just happen to women, it happens to men too. But under the legal definition in the West, actually, you know, it's not technically possible for a woman to rape a man, despite the fact that it happens. All that happens is she gets done for sexual assault, which is a much lesser offense than rape. The only time she can be convicted is if she assists someone else. And when we're talking about violence, it's funny because as if men are the only ones who are violent. When in fact, we've found actually, I think between, in the space of 5 years, I've got it here somewhere, violence from women quadrupled. Not only that, but in domestic violence, a lot of us are familiar with the statistics that, you know, domestic violence, male victims almost are just as likely to be victims as female victims. However, it's not a gender issue, because actually one of the highest levels of domestic abuse is not between heterosexual couples, it's between homosexual couples. And the highest is between lesbian couples. So is this a gender issue? Where does this come from? So, you know, it's not a gender issue. And this is the problem with looking at things only from a gender perspective. We don't look at the facts. We look at only the statistics we want to look at. And when I mentioned anecdotes earlier, I wasn't mentioning it to say these things don't happen. I was saying that anecdotes alone do not justify an ideology. Anecdotes alone do not provide a system of response. I'm just going to find those statistics for you just so that you have them.
Just over a minute.
Okay. So to end, I mean, there's still, you know, Julie Bindel, sorry, I keep calling you by your full name. Julie said that, you know, feminism has achieved a lot. It's achieved a lot. Really? Why are we still in the position here that we are today? With women being sexually exploited to the nines, with women being abused in their homes and on the streets, with women still being, you know, not having the same access to, these are feminists' complaints. Women still being, you know, sexually harassed in the workplace and discriminated. Are these feminist achievements? Islam, over 1,400 years ago, already provided all of these rights, already provided women to be politically involved. It mandated that women be politically involved, and many of them were. It mandated that they be economically involved. Women formed their own contracts. They didn't have to have a man form it on their behalf. So why is feminism now coming along and saying, you know, we've done so well, we just need to keep going. We don't quite know what we're doing or where we're going, but we'll get there. Why not just look at a system that has already done this? It's proved and tested, and it has been established in the past, and all it needs in the Muslim world is revival. Thank you so much.